What is up, guys? It is me, Real American Politics, back in with a new video. And today I wanted to go over the Battleground map of 2024 and beyond. But before we get into that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash like down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit the little bell, and yes, let us get right into the video. So before we even talk about, what the future Battleground map of US politics is looking like, I want to go back to what the map would look like if the demographics and all that stuff was 20 years ago and 10 years ago, okay? So, 20 years ago, this is roughly what the Battleground map would look like, Again, I'm not saying these are the correct electoral results, this is just modern day if states voted exactly the same as they did for years 20 years ago. And this is what the not the Republicans, the Battleground map would look like in 20 years ago. Notice anything odd? Notice anything in particular? No? Well, 20 years ago, Republicans still haven't gone to places like West Virginia, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee locked down. Instead, they had places like Virginia locked down. You can make the argument of Colorado, but at that time, it was starting to become, a trendy, battleground state. But for argument's sake, even if you added that, Republicans would have essentially 182 electoral votes they would win no matter what. Democrats 190. But again, you make the argument that Colorado was a battleground and all of that. So there was really 176 electoral votes that Republicans could have a chance of winning. And this was a strategy for years. Just, hey, with so many states having battleground potential, just appeal to such a broad base of quote-unquote moderates that we can win every single time. Well, 10 years after that, or 20 years after that, you had this battleground map, which was roughly, 5 years ago, prior to Trump. Their strategy wasn't working. It was falling behind. Republicans, sure, they had 193 electoral votes to work with, up by around, 21. But look at Democrats. The Democrats in this time started to consolidate their vote. Instead of focusing on smaller, rural, southern states, they focus on more populated, heavy, northeastern and midwestern states. And you see the changes. And yes, Oregon can be a battleground, but whatever. Either way, this was the battleground map before Trump, and this is why Republicans were seen as a dead party. Because here's what would happen every single time. Oh, Republicans win Colorado, North Carolina, and let's say Florida somehow. Well, you see, Democrats win Wisconsin, Ohio, and Virginia. They need a single state in this situation to win. And the 4 states they could choose from were fairly easy. Oregon, Oregon, fairly left-leaning on some issues. Nevada, before Trump, Hispanics hated Republicans. Iowa, back then, was a blue dog state. So it was very easy for Democrats to win the state. In New Hampshire, that's kind of a flip-flop. Well, Republicans, they would have to pull people's teeth to make them vote in some of these states. And the usual results would look something like this, They would even lose Colorado and Florida. And this was the usual result, Yeah, they would win North Carolina, but they would sometimes win Ohio, sometimes win Colorado. Every now and then win Florida. They still couldn't win the election. But things have changed significantly in 10 years. The party has changed a lot. Instead of being an establishment shill party, right, it still has components of it. It's becoming more blue-collar, working-class party, all right, a populist, nationalist party with actual conservative values. And this changes a lot because, unironically, Trumpism, nationalism, whatever you want to call it, saved the Republican Party. It expanded the battleground map and created more titanium Republican states. And let's get into that. So, let's get this out of the way. Let's get rid of all the obvious, safe Republican states that is going to be Republican for years. And you've made an argument for Kansas, but I'll be making a video on Kansas eventually. That's just a ridiculous assumption. Yeah, I had 1 or 2 bad election cycles, but Kansas is one of those states that always seems like they have 2 bad election cycles, Republicans, then swings like 20 points Republican the next cycle. So that's why I'm telling people relax about Kansas. So this is the for sure, Republican stronghold. Democrats, this can be the argument for the for sure, no matter what you do, they're going to vote Democrat. All right, these are the states, and of course, Maine second. So these are the for sure, no matter what you did, they would vote Democrat. Now, Republicans are still going to win Texas for the future. This idea of Blexis, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to happen. It's a cope, it's a psyop. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. But again, it's not going to happen. I made a video on this. The Houston suburbs alone, you look at what's happening in local elections in Houston, the Dallas suburbs, even San Antonio. Conservative nationalist Republicans are winning districts they should be getting crushed in, but they're winning by significant numbers in like Biden plus 15 districts. So that's why I'm saying Texas is going to stay Republican for a long time. And the only way I could see it being Democrat is if you have some shitty neocon that's like, oh, let's just bend over backwards for the transgender agenda. That's the only way that state would even come close to becoming, a quote-unquote toss-up to a Democrat state. If it was going to happen, 2020 was the year. Also places like Iowa, Ohio. I don't even want to have to say much. Those 2 states are trending Republican, and this was their last chance. The Democrats to win their states in 2020. They couldn't. So those states, they're gone. In Oregon, for the Democrats, I made a video on this. I do think there's a chance for the governorship to flip. For presidential elections, it's gone from, borderline toss-up to, safe Democrat state. Now, there's one more state I wanted to touch upon. Florida. The Democrat Party there has collapsed. They've given up. I think they cut all funding to the state even. And their main candidate is a former Republican and independent who's lost like 5 times at statewide level. I hate to burst your bubble, but that state is gonna be Republican for a while. Plus, with the Cuban trend, the Hispanic trend in general, and plus there's places like Hillsborough County where Tampa Bay is. There's signs that there's trends Republican happening there. And again, you got the Jacksonville area, which will trend a bit Democrat. But yet you counter that with Orlando and Tampa. That kind of counteracts each other. So that's why I do think Florida, for the future, is a titanium state that will not go anywhere. Now you have Virginia. This is a weird one because I think it'll be closer than usual than 2020, but for argument's sake, we're going to have Virginia as a safe, Democrat state for now. Even though I personally think that Republicans will do a bit better there, not win it, but just a bit better. And then you got the one state that I think anybody with a brain would realize it's gone, Wisconsin. My home state, it's a beautiful state, by the way. It's not going to go Democrat. This was their last time they're going to win it. 2020, they had a lot going for them, and they still could barely muster enough votes through means. Not saying just certain means, but also actual people voting. This was their last chance to really do it. And plus, you look at the internal polling that's happening, the Democrats are starting to slowly stop funding Wisconsin. It's very slight, but they even realize, yeah, Wisconsin, let's just avoid that. Now, for the rest of the states, I'm making the argument these are the battleground states for the future. And that's 105 electoral votes. But for Republicans, it's 229. Back, 20 years ago, it was 172. 10 years ago, roughly, it was 193. Trumpism has caused a huge jump by around 30 electoral votes they start off with for free, essentially. And again, you can make the argument of Wisconsin, being battleground and North Carolina being Republican, but really Wisconsin's a red trending state, and North Carolina, it's going to be Republican forever, just way closer than it should be. Now, alright, I'm sorry about that. My my OBS like broke, so I kind of cut halfway through. But essentially, what I was saying was New Mexico is one of those states that you can make the argument either way based on demographic changes for suburban reversion, all that stuff. But that's essentially the argument. Anyways, this is what I believe the Battleground map for 2024, 2028, etc. is going to look like, roughly speaking. And again, you make an argument for places like Wisconsin, maybe Florida, maybe North Carolina being different. But I do believe this is roughly what it will look like. And yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Godspeed to everybody.